The metallic clang of boots echoed through the desolate streets as Captain Elias Voss led his squadron through what had once been the heart of humanity's most advanced city. Towering skyscrapers now stood like skeletal remains, their glass facades shattered and walls scorched from orbital bombardments that had rained fire upon Earth for 72 hours straight. The air carried an acrid tang of burnt ozone and something else, something alien, that made his throat tighten with each breath. Elias adjusted his rifle strap, feeling the weight of not just the weapon but of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Around him, soldiers moved in practiced formation, their faces illuminated by the eerie green glow of their tactical visors. They were all that remained of the United Earth Defense Force's 9th Battalion, a group of hardened warriors who had fought tooth and nail against an enemy they barely understood. The Zytherians, a species whose very existence had seemed like science fiction until their ships descended upon Earth's atmosphere 6 months ago, had arrived without warning, without negotiation, and certainly without mercy. The initial contact had been catastrophic. Their ships, massive constructs shaped like obsidian shards, tore through Earth's orbital defenses as if they were nothing more than paper. Within hours, cities burned, communications collapsed, and governments crumbled under the sheer weight of the invasion. Humanity, so proud of its technological advancements, found itself utterly outmatched. The Zytherian weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Energy pulses that could disintegrate entire platoons in seconds, drones that moved faster than the eye could track, and towering war machines that crushed everything in their path. But it wasn't just their technology that set them apart, it was their biology. The Zytherians stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in chitinous armor that shimmered faintly under light. Their elongated limbs ended in razor-sharp claws capable of tearing through steel, while their insectoid heads bore multifaceted eyes that seemed to pierce straight into the soul. And then there was their queen, a figure shrouded in myth even among her own kind. Rumors whispered of her immense power, her ability to command entire armies with a single thought, and her insatiable hunger for conquest. For weeks, Elias and his team had been operating behind enemy lines, conducting guerrilla strikes against supply depots and communication hubs. It was desperate work, but it kept hope alive, or at least, that's what he told himself every night when sleep refused to come. Deep down, though, he knew the truth. Humanity was losing. Badly. The resistance movements scattered across the globe were fragmented, poorly equipped, and constantly hunted. Every victory came at a cost far greater than anyone cared to admit. As they approached the ruins of Central Plaza, Elias signaled for his squad to halt. He crouched low behind a crumbling wall, scanning the area ahead. The plaza was eerily silent, save for the occasional gust of wind that stirred ash and debris. Something about this place felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but orders were clear. Intelligence reports suggested that the Zytherians were using this location as a staging ground for some unknown operation. If they could gather intel or disrupt whatever plan the aliens had brewing here, it might buy humanity precious time. "Stay sharp," Elias muttered into his comm unit, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like this." Behind him, Corporal Mira Chen nodded, her fingers tightening around the grip of her plasma carbine. She was young, too young for this kind of war, but she'd proven herself time and again. Her dark eyes darted nervously between shadows, searching for any sign of movement. "You think they know we're coming?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "They always know," Elias replied grimly. "But knowing doesn't mean they'll expect us to walk right into their trap." He raised a fist, signaling for the others to move forward. Slowly, carefully, they crept toward the center of the plaza, where a massive structure loomed, a twisted amalgamation of human architecture and alien design. What had once been a grand monument celebrating unity now served as a grotesque symbol of domination. Alien glyphs pulsed along its surface, casting sickly green light across the surrounding area. At its base stood rows of kneeling figures, their forms obscured by distance and shadow. Elias froze, his blood running cold. Human captives. Dozens of them, maybe more. They knelt in perfect formation, their heads bowed low as if in prayer or submission. A wave of nausea hit him as he realized what he was seeing. These weren't prisoners of war, they were collaborators, forced or coerced into serving their conquerors. Or worse, willingly bowing to the will of the invaders. And then he saw her. The queen emerged from within the structure, flanked by a retinue of elite guards clad in glistening black armor. She was taller than any Zytherian he'd seen before, her presence commanding an aura of absolute authority. Her exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian, reflecting the dim light in ways that made her seem almost otherworldly. But it was her eyes that held him captive, multifaceted orbs that glowed with an inner fire, radiating intelligence, cruelty, and something else he couldn't quite name. Power. Madness. Both. She stepped forward, her movements fluid yet deliberate, each step resonating with an unspoken threat. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unnatural resonance that filled the entire plaza, reverberating in Elias's chest like a physical force. "Kneel, humans," she commanded, her words translated into perfect English through some unseen mechanism. "Acknowledge your place beneath us." One by one, the captives lowered themselves further, pressing their foreheads to the ground in abject surrender. Elias clenched his jaw, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage. How many times had he heard stories of such scenes? How many times had he imagined standing in those people's shoes, forced to choose between dignity and survival? He couldn't fathom either option being acceptable. His squad shifted uncomfortably beside him, their training warring with their instincts. They hadn't signed up for this, to watch their fellow humans grovel before an alien tyrant. Elias glanced at them briefly, meeting each pair of eyes. He didn't need to say anything. They already knew what he was thinking. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a reckoning. The Queen paused, tilting her head slightly as if sensing something amiss. For a moment, Elias thought she might have detected their presence, but then she turned her attention back to the kneeling masses. "Your resistance is futile," she declared, her tone dripping with disdain. "Your species clings to notions of freedom, of defiance, yet you lack the strength to wield them. You are weak, fragile, unworthy." Her words struck a nerve, igniting a spark of rebellion within Elias's chest. Weak, fragile, perhaps, but unworthy, never. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his mind racing with possibilities. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Any attempt to intervene would likely result in their deaths, and possibly the deaths of everyone in the plaza. Yet doing nothing felt equally unbearable. Then, amidst the sea of bowed heads, a single figure rose. A man, no older than 30, stood defiantly, his shoulders squared and his chin lifted high. His clothes were tattered, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood, but his eyes burned with a ferocity that defied description. He locked gazes with the Queen, refusing to look away. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Who was this man? What madness possessed him to stand when everyone else knelt? The Queen seemed equally taken aback, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to thinly veiled irritation. She took a step closer, her towering frame looming over the lone rebel. "You dare defy me?" she hissed, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "I offer you life. I offer you purpose. All you must do is kneel." The man said nothing, his stance unwavering. Around him, the other captives began to stir, lifting their heads cautiously to witness the unfolding drama. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mixture of awe and terror. The Queen's mandibles twitched, a subtle sign of agitation. "Do you not understand what I am offering? Kneel, and you shall live. Resist, and you shall perish." Still, the man did not yield. Instead, he raised his hands slowly, palms open and facing outward, a gesture of peace, but also of challenge. It was as if he were saying, "Take my life if you must, but you will not break my spirit." Elias felt a surge of admiration mixed with dread. Part of him wanted to shout, to tell the man to drop and crawl like the rest. Another part, the part that still believed in humanity's potential, wanted to cheer, to rally behind this unexpected act of courage. But he remained silent, watching intently as the Queen circled the man like a predator sizing up its prey. "Interesting," she murmured, her voice soft yet laced with menace. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Either way, your defiance intrigues me." She extended one clawed hand, hovering it inches from the man's face. He flinched but did not retreat, his resolve seemingly unshaken. The Queen tilted her head, studying him with those piercing eyes. "Tell me, human, why do you resist? Your species has already lost. Why throw away your life for nothing?" The man finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "Because living on your terms isn't living at all." A murmur swept through the crowd, growing louder as more people dared to lift their heads. The queen's expression darkened, her patience visibly wearing thin. "Foolish creature," she spat. "You cling to ideals that will only lead to your destruction. Very well. If you wish to die, I shall grant you that wish." Before she could strike, however, a sudden commotion erupted near the edge of the plaza. Shouts echoed through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. Elias cursed under his breath. Someone had triggered an alarm. The queen whirled around, her guards snapping to attention as chaos descended upon the scene. Seizing the opportunity, Elias gave the signal to advance. "Move!" he barked, charging forward with his squad close behind. Bullets flew, energy blasts illuminated the darkness, and screams filled the air. Through the chaos, Elias kept his focus on one thing: reaching the man who had refused to kneel. The battlefield erupted in a cacophony of deafening blasts and searing light as Elias and his squad surged forward, their weapons spitting fire into the ranks of startled Zytherian guards. The queen's forces scrambled to respond, their disciplined formations momentarily disrupted by the unexpected assault. Energy pulses sizzled past Elias's head, narrowly missing him as he zigzagged toward the defiant man at the center of the plaza. Each step brought fresh challenges. A fallen beam blocked his path, forcing him to leap over it. A drone zipped past, its rotors slicing dangerously close to his helmet. Mira stayed close to his flank, her plasma carbon emitting bursts of blue-white energy that cut down two Zytherian soldiers advancing on their position. "Captain, we're drawing too much attention," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. "I know." Elias snapped back, ducking behind a chunk of rubble as another pulse blast vaporized the ground where he'd been standing moments before. "Just keep moving." The man who had refused to kneel remained rooted in place, his gaze still locked onto the queen despite the chaos swirling around him. Elias couldn't help but marvel at his composure. Even now, with death closing in from all sides, he showed no signs of fear. Was it bravery? Stubbornness? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, Elias knew they couldn't leave him behind. Reaching the edge of the plaza, Elias spotted several Zytherian shock troopers converging on the man's position. Without hesitation, he unleashed a volley of rounds, taking out one trooper with a clean shot to its thorax. The others turned their attention to him, their multifaceted eyes glowing with predatory intent. Elias rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe from one of their claws. He fired again, this time striking the second trooper in its jointed leg, causing it to collapse with a screech of pain. "Need backup," Elias yelled into his comm unit, his fingers squeezing the trigger repeatedly as he tried to hold off the remaining enemies. Behind him, Mira and Corporal Jansen sprinted into view, laying down suppressive fire that forced the Zytherians to retreat temporarily. Elias seized the moment, vaulting over a low barrier and closing the final distance to the defiant man. "Who the hell are you?" Elias demanded, grabbing the man's arm and pulling him toward cover. Up close, he could see the toll captivity had taken: gaunt cheeks, sunken eyes, and an assortment of bruises mottling his skin. But there was no mistaking the fire burning in his gaze. "My name's Daniel," the man replied, his voice strained but resolute. "And I'm not going anywhere without finishing what I started." Elias didn't have time to argue. "Fine. Stay alive, and maybe you'll get your chance." He shoved Daniel behind a toppled statue just as another energy pulse exploded nearby, sending shards of stone flying. "Jansen, cover our 6. Mira, find us an exit." As the fight intensified, Elias found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to cut their losses and regroup. They'd already achieved the impossible by infiltrating the plaza and rescuing Daniel. Any further engagement risked turning their victory into a massacre. But on the other hand, the queen was still there, her towering form cutting through the chaos like a storm front. She hadn't fled, hadn't even flinched as her forces struggled to contain the unexpected resistance. Instead, She watched with an unsettling calm, her multifaceted eyes tracking the skirmish with detached interest. Elias caught glimpses of her between exchanges of fire, her presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. There was something unnervingly human about her demeanor, not in appearance, but in the way she seemed to relish the spectacle unfolding before her. It wasn't just power she wielded, it was control. She orchestrated events like a conductor leading an orchestra, ensuring that each note played exactly as she intended. Even now, as her troops faltered under the relentless assault of Elias's squad, she appeared unfazed, almost amused. And then she moved. With a speed that defied logic, the queen leaped into the fray, her armored body smashing through a barricade as if it were made of paper. 2 of Elias's soldiers went down instantly, their cries cut short as her claws tore through their defenses. The sight sent a chill down Elias's spine, but it also ignited a spark of determination. He couldn't let her win. Not here, not now. Fall back, Elias ordered, firing a grenade launcher mounted on his rifle. The explosive detonated mere feet from the queen, sending a shockwave rippling through the air. For a brief moment, she staggered, her balance disrupted by the blast. It was enough for Elias and his team to reposition, dragging Daniel along with them. "What's the plan?" Mira asked, her voice tight with desperation. They were running out of options. And ammunition. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. The original objective had been simple: gather intel and disrupt the Zytherian operation. But now, with the Queen directly involved, everything had changed. Retreat would mean abandoning not only Daniel but also the dozens of captives still kneeling in the plaza. Staying would almost certainly result in their deaths. Yet leaving felt like surrender, a betrayal of everything they'd fought for. "We take her down," Elias said finally, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside him. "If we can neutralize her, the rest of them might fall apart." Mira stared at him, incredulous. "You're insane. She's not just another soldier, we can't." "I know," Elias interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But if we don't try, none of this matters. We're already dead anyway." Before Mira could protest further, the Queen recovered, her movements smoother and more deliberate than before. She scanned the area, her gaze locking onto Elias's position. A low growl emanated from her throat, vibrating through the air like a warning. Then, with terrifying precision, she charged. Elias braced himself, raising his rifle and firing round after round. Each bullet struck true, impacting her exoskeleton with enough force to stagger most creatures. But the Queen absorbed the hits without slowing, her momentum unbroken. As she closed the distance, Elias realized with sinking certainty that conventional weapons wouldn't be enough. She wasn't just powerful, she was invincible. Or so it seemed. At the last possible moment, Daniel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Elias and the Queen. His hands were raised again, but this time they trembled, not from fear, but from exertion. A strange hum filled the air, resonating with an otherworldly frequency. The Queen halted abruptly, her head tilting as if puzzled by the sudden interference. "What are you doing?" Elias demanded, grabbing Daniel's shoulder and trying to pull him back. "Get down." "No," Daniel replied, his voice barely audible over the hum. "This is why I stayed." The hum grew louder, coalescing into a visible field of energy that enveloped Daniel's body. The Queen recoiled, her claws slashing at the air as if warding off an invisible threat. For the first time since the invasion began, Elias saw uncertainty in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that quickly transformed into something darker. "Impossible," she snarled, her voice distorted by anger. "You cannot." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he extended his arms, the energy field expanding outward until it engulfed the entire plaza. The captives cried out, shielding their faces as the light intensified. Elias shielded his own eyes, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Whatever Daniel was doing, it was beyond anything Elias had ever witnessed, human or alien. When the light finally faded, the Queen stood frozen, her body encased in a translucent shell of crystalline material. Her multifaceted eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, but the prison held firm. Around her, the remaining Zytherian forces wavered, their coordination breaking down as confusion spread through their ranks. Elias turned to Daniel, his mouth agape. "What how?" Daniel sank to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. "It's not over," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But it's a start." Elias knelt beside him, torn between awe and disbelief. Whatever power Daniel had unleashed, it had bought them time, but at what cost? And more importantly, what would happen when the queen broke free? The crystalline prison surrounding the queen shimmered faintly, its surface rippling like liquid glass as she tested its boundaries with every ounce of her formidable strength. Her multifaceted eyes burned with fury, and though her voice was muffled by the barrier, it carried an unmistakable edge of venom. "You dare imprison me?" she seethed, her words reverberating through the air as if they were a physical force. "Do you truly believe this will hold?" Elias crouched beside Daniel, who had collapsed onto his hands and knees, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool night air. The energy field that had erupted from him moments earlier now seemed to have drained him entirely. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and his trembling hands clawed at the ground for support. Elias grabbed his shoulder, steadying him. "Daniel," Elias whispered urgently, keeping one eye on the queen's prison. "What did you just do? How is this possible?" Daniel raised his head slightly, his gaze distant and unfocused. "It's not mine," he rasped, his voice cracking under the strain. "Not really. It's theirs." "Theirs," Elias echoed, confusion knitting his brow. Before Daniel could elaborate further, the sound of crumbling stone drew their attention back to the queen. Cracks spiderwebbed across the crystalline prison, spreading outward from where her claws raked against the inside. She wasn't contained, she was breaking free. "We need to move," Mira shouted, reloading her plasma carbine as she scanned the plaza for threats. The remaining Zytherian forces had regrouped, forming loose clusters around the immobilized queen. Their weapons hummed with charged energy, ready to unleash devastation at any moment. Elias hesitated, torn between retreating and pressing forward. If they fled now, they might lose their only chance to strike a meaningful blow against the invaders, but staying meant risking everything, especially given the dwindling resources of his team. And then there was Daniel, barely able to stand, let alone fight. As if sensing his indecision, Daniel forced himself upright, leaning heavily on Elias for support. "We can't run," he said firmly, bloodshot eyes locking onto the captain's. "If we leave her here, she'll tear this planet apart looking for us. Worse, she'll find out how I stopped her, and she won't stop until she destroys whatever gave me that power." Elias clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He hated being kept in the dark, but time was running out. Whatever choice he made had to be quick and decisive. The first shard of the crystalline prison shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards of translucent material flying in all directions. The queen roared, a sound so primal and guttural it made Elias's skin crawl. One of her arms burst free, lashing out like a whip and cleaving through a nearby Zytherian soldier who had strayed too close. The alien warrior disintegrated instantly, reduced to ash before hitting the ground. "Captain!" Jansen yelled, firing a volley of suppressive shots toward the queen's position. Several Zytherians attempted to flank them, only to be cut down by Myra's precise aim. But the tide was turning, their numbers were dwindling, and the enemy reinforcements showed no signs of stopping. Elias tightened his grip on Daniel's arm, dragging him behind a pile of rubble as another pulse blast exploded nearby. "Explain yourself," he demanded, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. "Now." Daniel winced but nodded weakly. "When they took me," he began, his voice strained but steady, "they weren't just interrogating me. They were experimenting on me, trying to understand why humans resisted so fiercely. They thought it was biological, something innate to our DNA. But—" He paused, swallowing hard. "One of their devices malfunctioned during the procedure. Something merged with me. A fragment of their own technology fused into my body. That's what you saw back there. It's not human. Not entirely." Elias stared at him, his mind racing to process the implications. Was this some twisted form of evolution, forced upon humanity by their conquerors? Or was it something else entirely? A weapon buried deep within the Zytherian arsenal, accidentally unleashed on one of their prisoners? Before Elias could respond, the queen broke free entirely, shattering the last remnants of her crystalline prison with a thunderous roar. Her towering frame loomed over the battlefield once more, her exoskeleton gleaming ominously in the dim light. She glanced briefly at the scattered remains of her own soldiers, her expression unreadable, before focusing her full attention on Daniel. "You are a curiosity," she growled, taking slow, deliberate steps toward them. Each movement radiated menace, her claws flexing rhythmically as if eager to rend flesh. "A fusion of my kind and yours, an abomination born of failure. Yet you wield power greater than even I anticipated." She tilted her head, studying Daniel with unsettling intensity. "Tell me, human, does it hurt? To carry such a burden?" Daniel straightened slightly, defiance flickering in his eyes despite his exhaustion. "Every second," he replied, his voice low but unwavering. "But it's worth it if it means stopping you." The queen let out a harsh, grating laugh that sent shivers down Elias's spine. "Admirable sentiment," she sneered. "Yet futile. Your resistance is nothing more than a fleeting spark in the darkness. My empire spans thousands of worlds, each conquered, each reshaped according to my design. Your species will join them, or it will perish. There is no third option." Her words struck a nerve in Elias, reigniting the simmering anger that had driven him since the invasion began. He stepped forward, placing himself between Daniel and the queen. "Then come and take us," he challenged, raising his rifle defiantly. "Because as long as we're still standing, your empire hasn't won yet." For a moment, the queen simply stared at him, her multifaceted eyes glinting with something akin to amusement. Then, without warning, she lunged, moving faster than should have been possible for a creature of her size. Elias barely had time to react, diving to the side as her claws sliced through the air where he'd been standing. Mira and Jansen opened fire simultaneously, their combined barrage striking the queen's armored exoskeleton with explosive force. While the impacts staggered her momentarily, they left no visible damage. She swatted at them like insects, forcing both soldiers to dive for cover as debris rained down around them. Elias scrambled to his feet, grabbing Daniel and pulling him along as they retreated toward the edge of the plaza. "We can't keep fighting her head-on," he shouted over the chaos. "We need another plan." Daniel shook his head, his expression grim. "There isn't one. Not unless you want to sacrifice everyone here, including yourself." Elias gritted his teeth, unwilling to accept defeat. They couldn't give up, not when they'd come this far. But the reality of their situation was undeniable. The queen was too powerful, too relentless. Even with Daniel's newfound abilities, they were outmatched. And yet, as Elias watched the queen advance, her movements methodical and calculated, a single thought crystallized in his mind. She wasn't invincible. No matter how strong or cunning she appeared, she was still vulnerable. The key lay in understanding her weaknesses, and exploiting them before it was too late. "Mira!" Elias barked, ducking behind a crumbling pillar as another pulse blast narrowly missed him. "Get the others to fall back. We're pulling out." "What about him?" Mira asked, gesturing toward Daniel, whose legs buckled beneath him as he struggled to stay conscious. "We're taking him with us," Elias replied, slinging Daniel's arm over his shoulder. "He's the only advantage we've got, and we're not leaving him behind." Mira hesitated, clearly torn between following orders and questioning the logic of dragging an injured man deeper into hostile territory. But ultimately, she nodded sharply and relayed the command to the rest of the squad. Within moments, the surviving members of the 9th Battalion began retreating in organized pairs, laying down covering fire as they moved. The queen didn't pursue immediately, instead choosing to observe their retreat with detached interest. Her guards, however, surged forward, attempting to cut off their escape route. Elias fired blindly over his shoulder, trusting his instincts to guide him through the chaos. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down not just by Daniel's limp form but by the crushing realization that they were running, not fighting, for the first time in months. But as much as it pained him to admit, survival was their priority now. They needed answers. They needed a strategy. And most importantly, They needed hope. Hope that Daniel's mysterious connection to the Zytherians held the key to defeating their oppressors once and for all. Hope that humanity's defiance wouldn't end here, in the shadow of a tyrant who believed herself unstoppable. Because if there was one thing Elias Voss had learned in his years as a soldier, it was this: wars weren't won by standing still. They were won by adapting, evolving, and finding new ways to fight, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And as he disappeared into the ruins with Daniel in tow, Elias knew exactly where they needed to go next. Somewhere hidden, somewhere safe, where they could unravel the secrets buried within Daniel's altered biology, and prepare to strike back. Elias led his battered team to an underground bunker, a forgotten relic of Earth's past wars. Inside, Daniel lay unconscious on a makeshift cot, his body trembling as if fighting an internal battle. The squad worked tirelessly, analyzing fragments of alien tech fused to his DNA, piecing together the puzzle of his newfound power. Days turned into nights, each moment heavy with urgency. Finally, Elias stood over Daniel, gripping his rifle tightly. "We'll fight her again," he vowed, his voice steady. "But next time, we won't just resist, we'll end this." The Queen's words echoed in his mind. Your resistance is futile. But Elias knew better. Humanity wasn't defined by its strength, it was defined by its refusal to kneel. As dawn broke above the ravaged city, Elias made his choice. They would rise, not as soldiers, but as symbols of defiance. And when the Queen came for them, they would be ready. For now, though, the war was far from over.